Hi, welcome to another episode of the Being and Doing podcast, where I'm trying to bring here stories of therapists and also the therapeutic parts that we can find in all of us. I'm Aleksandra, and I'm a gestalt therapist, gestalt student therapist, and a scientist. And today I'm joined by Vanesa, who is a returning guest, to talk about a topic that a lot of us are very familiar with, which is narcissism. But tonight we are going to give it a special flavor, which we are going to talk about cults and narcissism. And we are hoping to cover something about this topic that hopefully hasn't been said before, but also really to draw back attention to the seriousness of this topic, although it has become kind of a commonplace theme to be used in popular culture. So welcome back, Vanesa, and I'm really, really curious to hear more about your new project and the book and everything that's coming with it.
Thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy your company, and I'm so glad that you're still doing this work and we get to connect again.
So, do you want to start maybe saying something about the book and what kind of prompted you to write it, and what actually happened for you as you were writing it? I mean, imagine you have become a different person as well.
Yeah, so in my experience as a therapist, specifically treating victims of narcissistic abuse and cult abuse, I began to realize that people were not always connecting the dots between the two. It seemed as if there was this whole world around intimate partner violence and domestic violence in the relationship between partners. And then this whole separate world of what feels like happens in a long distance, far away place, which is the idea of a cult. And when I began to realize that I myself was in a cult of one, and that there are cults that are very, very small, and then there are cults of 2, 5, 25, 10 million. So there's really no kind of, version of it that isn't a cult, even if it's just one person that's experiencing it in the relationship with an intimate partner. And when I connected those dots, I thought this is really important that we highlight that all cults and all domestic violence relationships are led by a narcissist, a sociopath, or a psychopath. And that was sort of a defining moment for me. So then I wrote the book to fuse those concepts, so people can understand that not only does it happen, but that also it happens to very, very smart, very, very interesting, loving, clever, artistic, beautiful, curious, eager people. And it really has nothing to do. It can happen to anyone. So this idea of victim blaming and like, I could never be in a cult. Yes, you could. And you could be in a family system right now where you have somebody who is particularly authoritarian leading your family cult. And you may not realize it because, when you're in that environment for such a long time, you may not realize the toxicity of it, the manipulation that goes on. And so that was when it sort of had that aha moment that these are one and the same.
And I'm sitting with, chances are the more you're saying there's no chance I would be part of something like this, chances are most likely you are in the right this moment. I want to there are two questions I had about this, and I want to start at the victim blaming part, and that idea that we protect from, that this cannot happen to me, and maybe unpack it a little bit more. What's going on there? What are we doing when we are kind of putting this on some very vulnerable people and never imagining that this can happen to us?
I think it's hard for us to imagine that we would be manipulated, that we would be mind controlled. Most people don't think of themselves as being susceptible to mind control. It sounds like some sci-fi movie is happening, and it is really kind of otherworldly when you become
Mhm.
entranced by somebody who's abusive. So, that doesn't feel like it fits for most people. They don't feel like they're in a cult. They don't feel like they can be manipulated. They feel like they have agency. Um, even when you're in the cult, you feel like I mean, it's very confusing. Sometimes, like, I think about myself being in therapy very early on while I was in the relationship, and my therapist would try to sort of guide me around trauma and abuse, and I was very confused. I had no idea what she was talking about. What do you mean I need a safety bag? I'm not in a domestic violence situation. This person has never hit me before. So we have a long way to go in terms of identifying the characteristics of a psychological abuser. But when you get there, then you sort of level up and you sort of realize, like, these people are all around you. They're manipulative. And they are your neighbors. There are small cults occurring all around your world, and that's really important. But yeah, we don't do enough to have a dialogue about this. We don't teach our children about independent thinking and why it's so important. We actually tend to be more conforming. We have religious organizations that tell us to live in servitude, you know, and stuff like that. So we don't really do enough to, you know, kind of cultivate autonomy in young children where they kind of feel encouraged and validated on their own. We tell them to draw in between the lines and fall in line and do what the neighbor does and be a little bit sheepish. So I think, you know, we have a long way to go with that. But yeah, we sort of victim blame mostly because we're really projecting that we don't think we could ever be the victim of something like this.
Yeah. And the second part of the question was talking a bit more about what makes a cult, and how does one recognize that that what's going on is a cult-like behavior.
Yeah, so similar to the relationship with a narcissist, you're going to be dealing with somebody who needs constant attention. They need you to fall in line. They are going to have very little boundaries. So these are people that sort of take over your life. We see this with Scientology, where they kind of have you with blinders on, tunnel vision. You're disallowed from looking at media. So they are very controlling over your environment. They will occupy your energy and time, so you'll have to sit in sessions with the abusive person ad nauseum, hours upon hours upon hours, doing certain tasks. We saw this with the Nexium cult, just spending, you know, all of this energy doing rather innocuous things. In some cases, it feels very much like a Ponzi scheme where they will build out programs, or you'll be playing volleyball, but all of the energy is now focused entirely on the leader and then the fellowship. They can be very intimidating, isolating, and we see this as well in a narcissistically abusive relationship. Very manipulative, lying, triangulating, so they'll put people against each other within the fellowship. They will be passive aggressive, give the silent treatment. They will try to control your autonomy when it relates to eating, dressing, right? So they may say you have to cut your hair, you have to wear black, you're only allowed to eat this, you know, don't be so selfish, you should be doing this. And they sort of slowly whittle away at your character until you become a shell of who you are. And it really is the same in both environments. There is very little difference. The only difference I would say is that depending upon the malignancy of the cult leader, some of these environments do end in a violent death. And if it's more benign, there's this slow, like, death of the soul over time. So depending upon the malignancy of the leader. The other thing that's interesting is that if the leader should expire in the domestic violence scenario or in a cult directly, the cult, because of the minions and the mind control, can kind of exist on its own. The flying monkeys, etc., they will sort of, you know, maybe fight for the position of the leader at some point because they've sort of been kind of like toxified. So they actually will sometimes just carry on some of these things. And we see this with certain religious organizations. But so the leader may not necessarily even be involved anymore, but has really kind of perpetuated a narrative that the minions will now carry forward.
Mm. And I'm wondering, we were talking about last time, we didn't talk about much about what happens once you slowly start to leave these relationships, places, organizations, and what does the healing process entails? Because often um, the exit is just the first step, actually, towards regaining yourself and your life. And I just wanted, I know part of your story, but maybe you can refer to that, or to actually your vast experience with clients and um, yeah, and everything you've worked with.
Yes. So what happens is you're going to get involved in a smear campaign. So whether it plays out in the judicial system, in the family courts, or other court experiences, they are going to reverse victim and offender. So you will become the offender, they will become the victim of you. This is like a high level of projection. But that smear campaign, they are hyper concerned with optics and the narrative. So they are going to make sure that you are slandered throughout so that your story and your voice is robbed. And we did see this with cults, especially with Scientology, where Leah Remini very famously tried to expose them and did a great job. And they were hell-bent on silencing her. I mean, to the extent that, she's lucky she got out of that alive. And this is very much the minions doing the bidding of their, narcissistic leader, is that they will kind of threaten, intimidate, stalk, and then just constant legal proceedings where they drain you of your finances. They may go to your boss and tell a story about how, you're drinking the blood of babies. Who knows what other kinds of crazy things that they'll come up with, but also that they can destroy your life. They want you to be gone, essentially. So as close as they can get you to that. So the smear campaign is very, very treacherous. And this is why a lot of people don't leave, because it's usually worse than the abuse for a shorter period of time, God willing, but it really is the post-separation abuse from these environments is where it gets very dangerous for a lot of people. We see a lot of suicide, homicide, because they don't like to be exposed for what they are. So if you sound off about what you've experienced, then you will feel the wrath. And there is no wrath like a narcissist's wrath. They are particularly dangerous and deviant and maniacal. So, these are people that will take your kids from you, try to put you in jail with some level of success because they're very manipulative. They know how to work the system. It works for them. They really are adept and have developed those skills for a lifetime. So they are going to be good at it. This is no joke. And we see this with cults as well, is where if you try to leave, there's going to be a mass suicide, like in some of the cases with some cults, or there's going to be a mass homicide. Nobody is leaving. So that's where it gets really dangerous. The post-separation is really, really, really treacherous for so many people. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel, because once you get out of that and you do the healing and you find a support through a therapist, through attorneys, through friends, through other survivors, you begin to feel more empowered. So it's almost like a rebirth of sorts. And so it's never recommended to stay with somebody who is a narcissist, even though the post-separation is bad, because once you get through it, and it could take years, it's still better, because then there's this kind of opportunity for you to have better relationships. I know in my case, my friendships were far better, safer, more developed, people that were going to see me and hear me in a different way. I felt very believed and supported. All of the superficial noise from childhood and all of the people who, didn't get it just organically fell away. And now there's just a good group of people that I just absolutely adore that held space. Most of them are victims themselves, quite honestly. I think a lot of people tend to gravitate towards people that get it. So I was very blessed in that regard, but there are tons of silver linings along the way. You start to see the ugly of in people, and you become very in tune to kind of moving away from those kinds of people. So there's like almost like, you get a little clever to it. You have like almost a
Yeah.
sixth sense. And so um, that's important. And living authentically without having to walk on eggshells and have the freedom to take a bath, listen to a song, light a candle, just everything about that feels like it's laced in gratitude having survived something like this. And so I think there's a ton of healing that happens. I talk about that in my practice with my clients all the time in terms of dialectical behavioral therapy and getting grounded and going to the five senses and journaling about what you've endured. But there are so many ways that you'll rebound from it, but just like I would be lying if I didn't say that, to go through it is extremely taxing.
Mm. And I wonder what is in your experience, because you have plenty, that kind of works and really makes the support for the person to go through such a debilitating and really hard thing, because it's I often see and have friends who I know are going through post-separation abuse, and I see how difficult and taxing it is, and I also see how hard it is for them to get help because often they don't believe they deserve it. So I'm just wondering, what is it that in your experience really does the magic when it comes to healing and growing from this process?
I think we have to honor people's stories. If we have not walked in their shoes, we have to approach people with less judgment. We teach this
Mm.
in dialectical behavioral therapy. So, similar to, I am not a Black person, so I can never describe what this feels like. So in those environments, become a student, and it is my job to just hold space. Same thing with LGBTQ environment. It is something that I just hold space. I am the student in that environment. And it's with anything. I try to kind of reserve judgment and always just become the student, because that person is the master, not me.
Mm.
And I think we don't do enough of this in our society, specifically with women. We see so many men are mansplaining, and we see the internet where everybody thinks they know everything. And it's really important to be mindful, because, and this is really the key, because this can happen to your precious children. And then you'll really have a lot of shame around how you were quick to judge your neighbor. But then, fast forward a few years, maybe your gorgeous daughter, she falls into the arms of this person, and then you become hyper aware. And, the universe has a way of doing that to people. So you have to be careful when you're judging others, because this is more than likely going to find its way into your life, and then you will have to learn things the hard way. So try to kind of, look at things with a curiosity and less of an all-knowing judgment approach. And I think, social media and other platforms have made it particularly easy for bullies to go in and sort of mouth off and create, noise around things they know nothing about. And so I try to take that perspective, and I try to offer that to others, is to sort of remain non-judgmental until you've walked in those shoes. That's the way I really try to approach life.
Mm. And I wonder, you know, in being people's teacher and actually witnessing resilience of people, what I know it gives me a lot of hope, but I'm wondering what were your biggest learning from these processes in the way people have walked the path?
It was really hard for me because my experience was the relationship I got out of, he had resources. So there were lots of monies being exchanged in different ways. And I think people were very interested in the benefits of that. And I saw a lot of people that I thought cared about me become interested in that. And it was really an awakening that people were going to be like that. And so I think it was a big wake-up call to see how resources would go a long way with people. And that was really scary. Fortunately, I stayed pretty grounded and didn't lose sight of myself and my priorities and my fundamental values. But I can't say that for a lot of people. I think I was scared to see so many people kind of interested in things that were rather superficial. So that was a big scary thing, particularly because I was sitting on the board of a domestic violence center, and the board members, some of the board members and some of the executive people were actually similarly kind of not supporting me. And that was really eye-opening. And I put that in my book, actually. I did talk about that experience because these are systems and institutions that are put in place to protect you and make you feel supported. So they're the last place you would think that you would ever feel re-victimized. But that does happen. And we see this with therapists. We see some therapists are re-victimizing their clients. We certainly see it in the courts. That's no surprise. But there are kind of people that are out for their own interests that will really shock you in this journey. Could be family members. You could have a situation where your abuser now buddies up to your mom and mother is doing his bidding and you're pretty well horrified. Or they groom your own children and your own children are coming into your home and they're wired and they're recording you. It's really scary to think about some of the people that you will sort of peripherally lose in this endeavor. And I think that was the biggest pain for me. It wasn't that, it was the losing of the people I really love, but then it was also the justice piece, the injustice of it. Why aren't they held accountable? Why are they allowed to flit about the earth doing this to time and time again to someone else over and over and over again? Why isn't anybody helping me? Why aren't they in trouble for this? That's like the sort of collective experience of all of my clients is this injustice. Why are they allowed to get away with this? And so I think, again, we have a lot to do in terms of developing legislation that protects victims. That is something that I think will ultimately, help to create harm reduction and insulate people. So we have a long way to go.
Yeah, I mean, as you're speaking about this, I just remembered. So recently there was a hearing for a Me Too case in Serbia, where the actress was actually who reported this. She was actually questioned by her abuser. So I don't know if that's possible in the US, but this is unfortunately possible in Serbia. So,
Wow.
so she was cross-questioned by the person who was the
Oh,
perpetrator.
God.
So, I'm really wondering, yeah, how, well, what in your experience you've seen changed already? And who are the people who can make these changes? And what is it that all of us need to start assisting on, so that we can, you know, before anyone close to us gets there, things are already in place. Because it feels like people don't pay attention to this until and unless they go through the system. And I think only then it becomes obvious how many flaws and mishaps the system has. So I'm wondering, I know there are people that are already doing the work. So what are you seeing already being done and where you think we could do more? And what is it that now that there is a peaceful time, or for the people that are kind of not going through something very acute, that they can already do something about?
That is a great question. I think I'm seeing a shift in that people are even talking about it. So we're seeing on social media, people are starting to understand the vernacular, the characteristics, the words that are attached to the behaviors, how to identify them, how to share them with other people. We're seeing people beginning to speak out that are public figures, thankfully, that have a bigger platform. So that's always helpful. We're seeing people like Tina Swithin who are calling judges and therapists to task. She does amazing work. Her Instagram is One Mom's Battle, and I'm so obsessed with her. I put her in my book also because it takes such courage to go up against some of those players because they're particularly powerful. But I think really, really talking about it everywhere as much as you can, trying is to have a voice, even if you are feeling silenced by NDAs or civil restraints or other ways that that your abuser tries to keep you quiet. To the extent that you can talk about it, I think it's important. And here's why. The only time I ever see justice as it relates to domestic violence is actually in the cult world. And here's why I think that happens. Because there are a lot of people who are simultaneously victimized. So they lock arms and they go up against your abuser, and the abuser in cults ends up getting jail time. And I've figured out it's a numbers game. So my goal for the future is to somehow have victims of the same abuser lock arms and start to get into civil actions, class action lawsuits against their abusers. And we're seeing the coercive control laws start to come out, which I think will also contribute to that occurrence. I think that possibility becomes more real, and then you could see justice because of the numbers. And so this is why talking is so important. And I'm on this mission recently to have people really begin to connect with the other exes, if you can. It's not always going to work, I understand, but this idea of trying to heal in a vacuum, it's not serving us on a macro scale holistically, and it's not going to serve our daughters. It's not going to serve the next generations. And so we're going to have to learn how to become connected to the other victims so that we can sort of make a change, you know, on a grander scale. Because that's the only thing I ever see happen with justice is the cult abusers will actually get jail time because there are too many people up against them.
Yeah, that makes sense, because now I'm thinking about this case in Serbia where there was more than one girl, unfortunately. And it's only then when things start to roll, if if
Right.
only then is when people don't say, well, she was wearing short skirts or things like that.
Yeah.
But
Unfortunately, we
yeah.
don't listen to just one woman, and that's the sad truth, but we can't ignore the truth that is the way it is. So we have to do something
Do
different.
something. Yeah. And I actually really appreciate, I mean, as I'm listening to you speak, I appreciate the groundedness from which you speak. I imagine kind of there has been some work to get to that grounded space, because I don't feel you as combative, but I feel you as firm and fierce. And I think that's a really important space. And I'm wondering what supported you to get to that space where this is a cause it feels important for you. You're fighting for it, but not burning out in the process.
I think for me, when I develop a passion for something, I build mastery around it. I am so curious. Like when I was learning how to do Ironman triathlon, I know my coach, whenever she would say, you have to buy these shorts, or you need to get this gel, or you need to try this, it was done. I always kind of take things literally. And that's maybe why I was able to be victimized, is because I believe what you're telling me. You know, if you tell me this, let's do it. Let's go. Because I think of myself in some ways as a sponge, and I will kind of open my mind and be really like a radical learner. I'm so curious, almost nosy, quite honestly.
Mm.
And I think that is how I became so sure-footed, is I studied the hell out of this. Like, this became something I was so obsessed about learning, and I made it something that was like, it transformed my entire life because I was so curious about it. I'm still very curious about empathy, how, you know, neural pathways can change and shift, and why with some and why without.
Mm.
So there's much that I still have to learn, but I am always kind of curious about it. But the information that I have thus far, I feel extremely confident in, and sort of to be continued. I'm always learning, and I think that's probably what comes off is just this. I feel like I've built mastery around it. I feel confident in my skill set and what I've gathered, and also my own experience. You know, I didn't sort of second guess myself as much as time went on. You know, at first it was like, what the hell? I was like, am I the narcissist? What is this? Like, it was very confusing for a good while. And I had gone through the trauma bond, which I know you wanted to talk about too, a little bit, in terms of like
Mm.
how we get stuck in it.
Yeah.
But then after that kind of process, and you know, it's been 4 years or so, I just really dove into it. And when you're a clinician, all I'll do is listen to other people's stories. And so I thought, oh wow, that's familiar. And I would take notes, and I would glean things, and I was able to connect dots between what my clients were telling me, my own experience, what I had read about, and I just got right, you know, kind of into it. And I learned so much, and I continue to learn so much from my clients as well.
Mm. So maybe you can go into the trauma bond and just, yeah, just speak more to it. And I don't know if I really have words for it, so I'm wondering if you would be more skillful.
Sure. So
Yeah.
what happens when you're in a relationship with a pathologically disordered person is that they are obviously manipulating you, controlling you, love bombing you. And as they kind of go through the cycle of abuse, which is the love bomb, the devalue, and then the discard phases, on repeat, it looks like makeup session, tension building, fallout, makeup session, tension building, fallout. And the cycle of abuse repeats. And as it repeats, you develop an addiction to the makeup session. You're looking for that again. Please, I don't want to go through this anymore. Let's just get this over with. And that's the trauma bond, is you're addicted to that fix, that dopamine of getting okay again, right? And so that trauma bond is really hard to break. And when I got out of my relationship, I actually shook for 9 days. I was like
I
a drug.
remember that. Yeah.
And that is why it's so hard for people to leave, because it's like you have to, you know, titrate yourself off of a drug. And so that can be really, really challenging. And I honor anyone who's trying to do that. And again, it's obviously the best case scenario to do so, but it is really, really challenging to just, you know, kind of go cold turkey and get off of that drug.
Mm. Before I ask you a question about the book, I actually want to lean on the narcissist side because there is a lot of villainization, and I think sometimes as therapists, I feel I want to take a stance for that wounded part as well. And um, I'm wondering, do you have, or what, without labeling that toxicity, or I know it looks conscious, but some people are consciously manipulative. Some of these people are, but they're, as I experienced it in what was going on for me, it was a very unconscious, almost non-verbal process, and eventually it becomes something that a person can almost feel that they can do that to you. It's not verbal, it's not an agreement, it's not happening intentionally in some relationships. I'm just sitting with that part I don't know, it almost felt for me as I was trapped in some, I don't know, I don't have the words for it, because it's so pre-verbal, in some um almost like body level feeling, which is completely out of and then only after I've gone through all the steps, suddenly I realized, yeah, this was the love bombing. So I all that only then I kind of could put the words to my experiences. So what I'm sitting with is, if for some of them this is unconscious, whether is there a way, at least for some segment of this population, that therapy can be supportive and that we can do something before it gets to such an escalated, acted out place?
Yeah, I think if somebody doesn't have a personality disorder, so if they're just narcissistic, then they absolutely can. We see shifts with people that really learn to develop more empathy. Um, it's the disordered personality, is somebody who is, as you mentioned, intentionally harming, that we don't see much data around any shift. There's not much movement. There's no data that we can kind of provide. But if somebody is narcissistic, absolutely. If somebody goes into therapy and is insightful and wants to sort of peel back the onion layers, maybe there's trauma, maybe, you know, they need to get into practicing empathy. Maybe they need to kind of open up and develop more vulnerability or emotional intelligence. Absolutely. It's the personalities that are disordered, and it happens on a spectrum. So, you know, the more malignant, then you're going to see this sort of like, I'm not going to fix myself. Like, I like the way I am. You guys are, you know, weak and I'm winning. And they are not lying and they're not wrong. They
No.
are winning. But, you know, that is something that really depends. It's highly subjective on the person, and their willingness to change. If you see somebody who is willing to change and does change, then they're not likely to have this kind of a personality disorder, because if somebody has NPD, then they will pretend to change for a short while, and then, as Dr. Ramani refers to it, have this rubber band theory experience where they kind of just revert back to their bad behavior. So they're doing it as a way to sort of keep you around, play the game, you know, get you to fall for their garbage and then resume. But there are plenty of people who have narcissistic tendencies that can absolutely work on, you know, some of the ways maybe they were brought up, and some of their parents' best intentions weren't, you know, really good, in terms of maybe father was an alcoholic and father is now sober, and, you know, things are moving in a better direction. So somebody who's narcissistic can change. Somebody who has NPD, not likely.
Mm. And so, for the sake of time, I want to go a little bit into the book, and just to kind of speak to maybe what is it that you wanted to write it for, or who is it that you wanted to write it for, and also what are the maybe what do you think were the ideas that you felt were not there before your book, but you think your book is bringing forward?
Yeah, so the book is called Narcissistic Abuse, A Therapist's Guide to Identifying, Escaping, and Healing from Toxic and Manipulative People. It was published by Hachette. It's available on Amazon.com as well. And it comes out October 29th. And the aim of the book is to fuse the concepts of narcissistic abuse and cult abuse, like we talked about today. There's not a lot of literature on fusing those concepts. And so I thought it was really important to highlight and marry those concepts, because they are one and the same. And I think it can feel radical to people. And in fact, when I was writing the book, the publishing company would be like, are you sure people are going to really understand what you're trying? And I really advocated for myself, because I know I do a good enough job to sort of lay it up and really kind of circle back and really describe what I'm trying to describe, which is that they are the same. And I think people will have light bulbs go on over their heads around connecting those two things. And so I hope that, you know, it resonates with people. I hope that they, begin to understand that this could happen to anyone. So it's not just for victims, but it could be for a family member. It could be for, a therapist, a judge, an attorney, somebody who needs to become more learned on their characteristics, on their tactics, why they're so dangerous in terms of on a macro scale politically, on a micro scale. But the macro scale thing is starting to seem, really scary in terms of political climates, because if people who have no empathy get into positions of power, you can see damage like we saw in Nazi Germany and stuff like that. So we have to kind of think about this as a society and as a huge problem, because if we don't figure it out, we could cease to exist. I mean, that's how serious it is. If somebody's in a position of power, doesn't care about other people, that's a really slippery slope. So these are really important conversations.
And I know we've talked about this in our last podcast, but I always feel like I always wonder, we have this knowledge, um, and I'm wondering, why is it not in the institutions, and why aren't there trainings and more trainings about this, and how to have these conversations? So I don't have ideas, but maybe you have.
I think one of the problems we're having is that most of the people in positions of power are narcissistic. So they don't really want to advocate for the little guy. They tend to benefit from people being controlled and manipulated. So, we have a lot of barriers. There are a lot of people who are in those higher positions who are not going to be interested in these kinds of conversations. So probably we would have to vote in some decent folks before we would get any movement, and it could be a while depending upon where you live. But I think that is a huge barrier, is that those people tend to climb the ladder and become in those positions, and then they'll make all of the executive decisions around, what they care about. And this doesn't seem to be one of those things because it doesn't serve them.
Mm. Okay, I'm wondering if is there anything else that you want to add to this conversation, and something that you feel like we've missed, but it's a really important thing to say about narcissism and abuse.
I don't think so. I think you, as always, do a brilliant job of having just a great organic conversation with me, and I'm so grateful and appreciative. I just want people to know that that they are believed and they're not crazy, and it's not them. They're not wrong. This happens to so many people. Millions and millions of people are experiencing this.
Thank you. Thank you for ending on that note. I think it's really important.
Of course.